getting ready to go live here on YouTube. Hey, Rachel. All right, we're live on YouTube. And let's get started. All right, so let me share my screen. So tonight we're going to be, as I said, talking about lifestyle management of autoimmune diseases. And I really became interested in this very suddenly, actually, in 2004. And I've probably mentioned this to you before, but I had a patient that came in named Karen in 2004, and she had the worst lupus I had ever seen. She had rashes all over her body, and I had her on all kinds of medications that were really terrible, medicines that are, used as organ transplant medicines. And I felt really terrible. I had her on so many things that when I would drive home and I would stop at a red light, I was worried for her because of all the medications that I had her on. And, they didn't do anything, unfortunately. Maybe a little, just ever so slight improvement in her joints and her skin, but very, very, very little compared to the potential side effects. And we stopped the medications, and she came back 3 or 4 months later, and she was virtually completely clear. And at the time, that was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. It reminds me, and it really changed the way that I look at medicine completely. She was able to take care of this on her own, and she provided me with a lot of information that really changed the way I look at medicine. And at that point in time, I really started to get interested in pursuing, or at least at that time, learning about lifestyle management of diseases. And I owe a lot to Karen for that, for showing me that there was this, and also showing me that the literature is actually filled with all kinds of information on how to improve autoimmune disease. But it's not something that conventional, just your general doctor is interested in, because, well, we have a lot of new medications out there now that are really amazing. And as all of you know, I'm still a conventional doctor, and I use all the medications that I'm going to be discussing. But I am always incredibly excited when someone is willing to embark on looking at things from a lifestyle perspective. And when I can get people involved in that, it really is the most satisfying thing that I do. Now, most doctors, quite frankly, have had circumstances, patients that have had these remissions. Unfortunately, most doctors, when they happen, they just sort of chalk it up to, just an unexplained spontaneous remission, primarily because they're not aware of the extensive nutritional and lifestyle literature that, especially for a condition called rheumatoid arthritis, that has actually been published. Most of the lifestyle modification of autoimmune diseases that's in the medical literature revolves around rheumatoid arthritis, the most literature, and lupus, as well as a good amount for psoriasis and some for MS, and a fair amount for something called autoimmune thyroiditis. Now, my postgraduate after medical school training was in dermatology. And then in 2004, after Karen, I really started to pursue looking at lifestyle medicine in general. I still practice dermatology, and my experience in terms of this topic really revolves mostly around psoriasis and lupus. However, I've certainly reviewed most of the literature for rheumatoid arthritis, because most of the time, for me, if there is a good article for rheumatoid arthritis, I usually use that as a trial for patients with psoriasis as well as lupus. So as we go into this, you'll probably hear a little bit of me talking more about psoriasis and lupus more than the other autoimmune diseases, of which there are probably over 100. So let me share my screen, and we'll get started. Okay, one second. Okay, let's see. Okay, there we go, share screen. And then I don't see my, here we go. All right, so you should see my screen. I should be a little guy in the corner now. And this is an overview. And by the way, we're always, as you know, we're live. So if you have any questions, then let me know. And quite frankly, I bet everyone on here knows someone with an autoimmune disease. If you do, type it in. I'd like to hear who close to you has an autoimmune disease that you're aware of, and if you have one. Because in the US, around 10%, up to 10% of the population actually has an autoimmune disease. The statistic is 7.6 to 9.4% of the world population, up to 10% in the United States. It's more common in young and middle-aged women, and it's essentially an excessive and prolonged activation of the immune system, basically. And so your immune system is made up of these cells, and yeah, so Pat has a friend with rheumatoid arthritis, and Sharon has a daughter with lupus. I'll pay a good amount of attention to lupus as best as I can, Sharon. So you basically have immune cells that are activated, and in addition to these immune cells, there's something called inflammatory cytokines, and these are like chemical messengers, and these chemical messengers are going to recruit the further immune system activation, and these are going to lead to sort of the body attacking itself, is sort of the simplistic way of looking at it. And there are a lot of different factors. For certain autoimmune conditions, there is a strong genetic component. That doesn't mean that you can't improve the condition if it is genetically determined. If you've been with me over the last 30 some odd weeks, we've certainly spent a great deal of time talking about how lifestyle can influence the way that your genes express themselves. And you can certainly change your expression of your genes in some very powerful ways. Obviously, there are dietary components. There's certain autoimmune diseases that are related to actual infections. And some of those are because the actual infection looks very similar to a part of the body, so that when the body builds up an immune response, it sort of mistakens the infection and the body organs. So you can get that. Stress, and particularly with stress with autoimmune disease, there's often a very stressful life event that people can sort of pinpoint. Whenever I see someone with autoimmune disease, I always ask about this, because it's one of those things where stress, obviously ongoing stress, can make autoimmune disease worse, but a stressful life event is often a triggering factor. And there are lots of ways of dealing with those sort of triggers in terms of using techniques like visualization. That would be I'll probably need to do a talk specially on that type of imagery exercise to help with these sorts of things. But it's a technique called reversing, and it was described by a doctor by the name of Gerald Epstein in New York. And that is very good for this sort of trigger, essentially. Intestinal permeability is another one that's really discussed quite a bit. And intestinal permeability is basically, you basically have one layer of cells that goes down your entire intestine, which basically is protecting you from the outside, because essentially it feels like, your GI system is inside your body, and obviously it is sort of obviously inside. But the point is that because you're taking things from outside into your gastrointestinal system, believe it or not, there's only one cell layer between you, between the food and the things that you ingest, and your body. And what can happen is when there is these sort of network of cells, and if they become loose and open and leaky, as they say, you can get antigens, you can get these things leaking through and into the bloodstream. And the theory for people who talk about this particular theory is that once that intestinal permeability starts and those things are leaking across the gut barrier, those are triggering an immune response that is potentially going to lead to what's called molecular mimicry, which is basically where your body is essentially mistaking some of these things that are leaking across for itself and triggering this autoimmune response. The other thing that is somewhat related, because it is something called dysbiosis, or some people call it a small intestinal bowel overgrowth, which is basically where you get a proliferation of various kinds of bacteria in your small intestine. Generally speaking, there's not a whole lot of bacteria that's supposed to be beneficial or not in the upper part of your gastrointestinal system. So when you have small intestinal bowel overgrowth, that is going to lead to a whole host of gut issues. And people who promote this particular theory, they often quote Hippocrates, because Hippocrates said that all illness starts in the gut. And there have been some pretty remarkable studies that have shown that, because now you can test for both of these things. There are actually lab tests for that. And when you test for these, and if you have them and then you reverse them, there is almost always an improvement in autoimmune disease. I've certainly seen that myself and in my patients. So if there is someone who has autoimmune disease and they've tried various lifestyle strategies, then the next step really is to talk about specific labs. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But doing tests for intestinal permeability and dysbiosis, as well as food allergy and food sensitivity, can be very, very helpful in that situation. Toxic chemicals as well. Not that there's any specific chemical, but it has been, I guess, theorized more than anything else that as a part of a comprehensive evaluation of people with autoimmune disease, there should be something to discuss about toxic chemicals. We spoke about that actually, I think week 2 or 3. We spoke about how to look at your life and to remove toxins. And then we spent another week, probably around week 9 or 10, where we spoke about what to do around your house and home to clean things up, to make sure there's no stresses, no chemical stressors that are happening in your environment. And all those are on my YouTube page. And you go down to Wednesday Night Live, and there's a list of all of these episodes. So that would be one to go to look at it. Okay, and we have someone with both celiac and Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Okay. All right. Now there are, depending on who you ask, there's many different kinds of specialized diets for an autoimmune disease. And I'm listing essentially four of them here. So one is called the autoimmune protocol. It's probably the most common one if you were to Google, diets for autoimmune disease. Then there's the auto-inflammatory diet, which is a much older diet and was mostly popularized by Dr. Weil, Andrew Weil. He's sort of one of the granddaddies of integrative medicine. And by the way, he has a podcast, which is fabulous, just started a podcast, and I highly recommend that podcast. They've only released 4 or 5 episodes, but they've been fabulous. And his perspective as someone who's sort of seen how lifestyle management and integrative medicine has evolved is really quite valuable. So I do recommend that. Mediterranean diet has certainly been shown to reduce inflammatory markers, meaning you can measure the blood and see that the overall inflammation in the body actually decreases. And then there's something called the Nutritarian diet. Now, going back to Karen actually did the Nutritarian diet. And I'll speak a little bit more about that as we get through tonight's episode. All right, so let's first talk about the autoimmune protocol. Now, it's essentially 2 steps. It's basically an elimination diet. Now, we spoke in detail about elimination diets somewhere around I would guess, the 4th through the 8th episode, somewhere around there. So getting a good understanding of an elimination diet, you can go to that. But let's talk about what the elimination diet is and in terms of the autoimmune protocol. So for step one, it's basically no nightshades. And nightshades have been known forever. You know, my father practiced quite a bit of rheumatology, and you know, it's just he even during for years, you know, rheumatologists have sort of known that nightshades could potentially be a problem. It's gluten-free because, believe it or not, gluten, even though, you know, not everyone is gluten sensitive, gluten, the protein itself, actually is just by itself irritating to the gut. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to avoid it, because plenty of people can tolerate gluten just fine. But in this particular case, we're talking about trying to eliminate anything that is going to irritate the gut, because quite a number of people who are promoters of the autoimmune protocol are talking about what we spoke about in terms of leaky gut and intestinal permeability. So gluten by itself can be irritating to the gut lining. All grains, because they have essentially anti-nutrients in them that can also irritate the gut. Dairy, eggs, coffee, because I can't remember why they actually eliminated coffee. Could be because it's, I'm actually not sure. I'd have to look that up. Not sure why they eliminated coffee. Nuts and seeds, essentially because they can be, people can have sensitivity to tree nuts. So this is a low antigenic diet, so a low allergy diet. Alcohol also damages the gut lining. And also it reduces your REM sleep. It's the most potent way to reduce the amount of REM sleep. And when you are reducing the amount of REM sleep, your sleep gets disrupted, and that just by itself increases the inflammation in your body. I'm reading right now a book called Why Do We Sleep? And it's a great book, but as you're reading it, you just think to yourself, my gosh, you know, we really need to protect our sleep in as many ways as possible. And alcohol, as he says in the book, is the most potent inhibitor of REM sleep. So just be aware of that. And, you know, you might not necessarily feel, some people won't feel the decrease in their REM sleep by drinking alcohol, but you can actually measure increases in inflammation, even though you might not necessarily feel it. Although most of us will feel day after day a buildup of fatigue if you're not getting an adequate amount of REM sleep, as well as sort of, you know, having issues with short-term memory and a whole host of things. Beans, which can also be irritating because of something called lectins. And we'll talk a little bit more about lectins as we go on. But I would just mention, all of you are probably aware of a book called The Plant Paradox that speaks quite a bit about lectins. And even in my patients, where I used to reserve getting rid of beans until sort of if things weren't responding, I do recommend that if you're going to eat beans, that you pressure cook them, because if you pressure cook them, the lectins, those proteins that are damaging to the gut lining, will basically go away. Then they go through a reintroduction phase. Of course, so what can you eat? You can eat proteins, clean proteins. You can eat healthy fats, avoiding things like sunflower seed oil and safflower corn oil. Just deal with olive oil and coconut oil, lean meats, lots of fruits and vegetables. That's basically, it's very much like a paleo diet, which it essentially is a paleo diet with some modifications. After they do that, they look to see, and then there's various reintroduction strategies of food, which I'm not going to go into here, but basically there are lots of ways of in a step-by-step fashion, reintroducing foods to see if you can tolerate them. Now, keep in mind, as I mentioned, there are labs to help with this, and those can be food allergy and food sensitivity. Food allergy is a specific type of food reaction, and food sensitivity is another. These are different types of irritation, I guess you could say. Food allergy is where, you know, your body's actually mounting an immune response, and food sensitivity is basically where your body is mounting a response of some sort. And these tests are actually now available and can be helpful to determine which foods might be an issue. Unfortunately, the food sensitivity tests are not covered by insurance, and they run around $250 to $300. And I plan on talking more about food sensitivity testing in a few weeks, probably, where I'll show you an example of a report and how it might be valuable for maybe in your situation to see if there are certain food sensitivities. Because if you have a food sensitivity, you don't necessarily have to completely get rid of it forever. You can actually, whereas if you have a food allergy, for sure, your body is remembering this food and doesn't like it. With a food sensitivity, you can actually just stop for a certain amount of time and then try to go back on that food, which makes it a little more sensitive to determining if there's a certain food that might be an issue. Now, next is the anti-inflammatory diet, which, as I said, came way before the autoimmune protocol and was popularized by Dr. Weil. He wrote a book on it years ago, actually. And this is the pyramid. This has been shown to reduce markers of inflammation. And when someone has an autoimmune disease, part of the tests that we routinely run are measures of inflammation. One's called C-reactive protein. And that particular measurement, which you may have gotten at your doctor's office, can be reduced by an anti-inflammatory diet. The base of the pyramid is fruits and vegetables, preferably in season, and berries because they're much lower in sugar, lots of vegetables, and he does say you can have a little bit of pasta, a little bit of grains, healthy fats, fish, whole soy foods, mushrooms, other sources of protein. Of course, we're going up the pyramid to healthy sweets like chocolate. Again, lots of resources online. It's not specific for an autoimmune disease, but it can be a very healthy diet, especially if this pyramid, this first level to the pyramid, is one that you're emphasizing, which is the most fruits and vegetables as possible. The next is the Mediterranean diet, which has been shown specifically to benefit rheumatoid arthritis. And it's not really, again, a specific diet for autoimmune disease, but they've done studies to show that it can be beneficial for rheumatoid arthritis. Now, I'm partial to the Nutritarian diet, primarily because Karen, that patient of mine, was on this diet. And this was created by Dr. Joel Furman. And I had a chance to discuss this with him in regards to psoriasis. After Karen came in, I met him at a conference, and I had a good chance to talk to him about his experience with psoriasis, which he had written about pretty extensively. But I had a good chance to talk to him about it, and afterwards, I really started incorporating it into my practice as best as I can. Now, before I show you everything that is in the Nutritarian diet, not everyone follows everything that is listed that I'm about to show you. However, I will say that I've had a lot of people, who do the autoimmune protocol, and I've certainly had a lot of people who I've recommended do the Nutritarian diet. I must say that in my experience, and this is just completely anecdotal and not based on any firm, evaluation, but comparing the two in some scientific study, just sort of my experience, the Nutritarian diet for autoimmune disease is great. I've seen it do incredible things, like near miraculous things when people are on this diet. With the autoimmune protocol, you often see improvement. And with all of these, let's just compare the autoimmune protocol and the Nutritarian diet. With the Nutritarian diet, I again, in my experience, I've seen the most improvement by far. Now let's talk about it. Just do a time check, okay? Okay, so the first line tends to get rid of a lot of people. It's vegan and it's gluten-free. Now, there are reasons for this. First of all, there are issues with animal protein, of which I'll be talking about that in another class, specifically talking about protein, probably in 2 or 3 weeks. But basically, as an example, there's something called endotoxemia, which is basically where you get certain bacteria that can go through the gut and into your bloodstream. That's you often get endotoxemia with animal products. Also, as the proportion of animal products increase in your diet, it means you're getting less vegetables, less healing foods. Animal foods are not healing in any way, quite frankly. And the overall rationale behind this particular diet is for you to load yourself up with the most amount of healing leafy greens that are possible. That is, you're basically maximizing the nutrient density of your diet. And this is sort of nutritarian times 3. The basic nutritarian diet is slightly different, obviously, because now we're talking about a disease-modifying diet. And as I've talked to you about before, there's a difference between a healthy diet and a disease-reversing diet. Certainly, most disease-reversing diets are healthy, but you don't need to be on a disease-reversing diet if you don't have a disease. It doesn't make it any more beneficial. Now, it's vegan, it's gluten-free. You do blended salads and soups. So basically, Instant Pot is perfect for this, where you make a big stew with lots of leafy greens and beans and onions and tomatoes. And keep in mind that all of these, for the exception of gluten, it allows you to eat beans. It allows you to eat nightshades. All of those. It allows you to eat nuts. It allows you to eat seeds. So if one were to guess what the reason for the benefit of this particular diet, one thing would be that you are just so overwhelming your system with positive and healing anti-inflammatory vegetables that it's just overpowering everything else. And I've seen it do incredible wonders, like near miraculous wonders with certain patients, certainly with Karen and several others after that. In fact, I'll just tell you, I don't know why this just came to my mind, but one anecdote, which it really just shows the amazing influence of just the amazing connections of people when wonderful things happen. This is something I had given the Nutritarian diet to a psoriasis patient, actually not too long after I saw Karen back in 2004. And and his psoriasis went away. It was great. It was awesome. And he was at a party with a colleague of mine. Actually, he was friends with one of the doctors in one of the other departments in family medicine, and he was just blown away because he knew how much he was suffering from psoriasis. So I got a call from this doctor, and he said, I can't believe this. I just really can't believe how his psoriasis went away. I said, I know, it's great. So I said, look, why don't you read, I recommended a book, one of Dr. Furman's books, and I guess he listened to it on a drive home from, and he decided that then and there that he was going to embark on this for himself. And he lost 70 pounds, got off all of his medications, and now he is a promoter of lifestyle medicine, and lectures around the country, and is on podcasts. And so it just goes to show that it's really a remarkable thing when amazing things happen. There's like this effect, like a domino effect of incredible things that happen. So I'm not sure why that came to mind, but it's such a great story that I just felt like I should share it. So blended salads and soups, because when you blend, you increase the bioavailability. Vegetable juicing, high dose omega-3. This has been studied extensively, and is something that you'll find pretty much in any autoimmune diet. You want to get 3 to 4 grams per day, actually, which is a very high dose. And it's been studied extensively, especially in rheumatoid arthritis, to help with autoimmune disease. Probiotics, I'll talk about them in just a moment. Paying attention to increasing turmeric, ginger, and other flavonoids, and we'll talk about that further as we go through. Optimal vitamin D levels. There's no question that in populations where vitamin D level is low, autoimmune disease is much higher, and you want to make sure that you're 50 to 70 on your vitamin D level. Everyone who should know. It's one of those things that everyone should know. If you didn't watch one of the episodes on the 7 tests that you need to know about, certainly vitamin D is one of them, and everyone should know what their vitamin D level is. Fasting, which has also been extensively studied in the medical literature, going back like 100 years, it has been known that when people go on water fast, their lupus, their rheumatoid arthritis, basically, in some cases, just completely disappears. It's incredible. The point is, what do you do when you get back onto food? And they initially, the original studies early, many years ago, showed it just came back. But there have been additional studies that have been done that have focused on going back to a vegan or high vegetable diet, which has been has been shown to keep the severity of the autoimmune disease at bay. Next is no salt and no oil. Salt we'll talk about a little bit later, but especially in psoriasis, it actually has been shown to affect one of the interleukins, one of the parts of the immune system that is related to one of the medicines that's one of the very expensive medicines that's out there, but it's certainly been shown to affect autoimmune disease. Now, oil, no oil. And the reason for oil is actually very similar in some ways to the reason why on this particular plan that you don't eat any animal protein. And the reason is because oil is 120 calories per tablespoon. And if you're getting those calories, then you're not getting calories from nutrient-dense foods like leafy greens. So the whole point here is making sure that you get as much of nutrient density as you possibly can. And so let's keep on going. So that's a Nutritarian diet. As I said, most people are on this, and I've absolutely seen people get better on that. But from my experience of the many people with lupus and psoriasis that I've personally treated, this particular plan, if you can follow even the majority of these, I've seen really amazing turnarounds, and it's quite amazing. Okay, now let's talk about supplementation. Let's close this down. So we spoke about omega-3s, and they are cornerstone of supplementation for any patient with autoimmune disease. And I had one patient, this elderly gentleman, probably 70 or so, and he had psoriasis, and he'd had it pretty much all of his life. And I talked to him about all these various types of things to try. And the only thing he said he would do was the omega-3. I said, okay, that's fine. And of course, this is an incredibly rare case, but his psoriasis completely went away to the point where I almost didn't believe it, because this is something to help. But in his case, his psoriasis went completely away, and I saw him for many years after that, and his psoriasis stayed away as long as he stayed on omega-3. Now that's obviously an incredibly rare but fortunate instance of omega-3, but nonetheless, it has been studied extensively in rheumatoid arthritis to improve inflammation and joint pain, a whole host of things. Vitamin D, we spoke about that. Probiotics, And now probiotics, you really need to do your own research for the autoimmune disease that you have, because there's various strains of probiotics, some of which could potentially, theoretically, make your autoimmune disease worse. So it's something that you really should spend a little time on, depending on what type of condition, that autoimmune disease that you might have. However, you could certainly try probiotic foods and see how you do with them. Again, some people, it could potentially be an issue. Most people do recommend probiotics. I would be cautious with them, and again, do your own research. Biophenols or phenolic substances, or all of these that was from an article by this person here, and just blow this up a little bit. So curcumin, so turmeric, which which we'll talk about a little bit more. It definitely is one of the supplements that I now add to pretty much everybody's. Green tea has been shown to help with MS. Narraginin, which is in grapefruit, apples, pomegranate, which is incredible. And a lot of these is like these TNF-alpha, IL-6. We spoke about IL-6 in the aging lecture. It's sort of an inflammatory chemical cytokine that actually increases with age. And one of the ways of reducing aging is to sort of tamper down interleukin 6. We spoke about that in the one of the aging lectures. Pomegranate, which is just fabulous, and for so many things, including heart health. And the reason it's doing that, it's lowering all of these different markers, inflammatory markers. And IL-10, which is an interleukin, is a very anti-inflammatory interleukin. That's why you're getting this additional benefit. And bilberry as well. But if you had to pick one of these, there's no question that curcumin has probably the most, turmeric has the most data out there when it comes to anti-inflammatory effect in autoimmune disease. And in the Nutritarian Diet, of course, he does recommend you try to optimize the use of turmeric, ginger, and other flavonoids. So, okay. Let me reduce this. Okay, good. Close this down. And we'll talk a little bit about, now, obviously, there are all kinds of labs that are available out there, and they're conventional labs. I'm not talking about the conventional labs. I'm talking about sort of the new generation of labs that could potentially be helpful for someone who wants to embark on a lifestyle approach. So the omega index, which I recommend for many people, just if they're taking omega-3s, it's nice to know. Or if you maybe have fish once a week, and maybe you have some fried food or something, because basically the omega index is a measure of the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3, and you want to have a good amount of omega-3. In this case, they measure it in red blood cells. And if you're eating too much omega-6, which is found in seed oils and nuts as well, if you're eating too much of that and too little of the omega-3, that's not going to be optimal, especially just in general, but especially for autoimmune disease. So I recommend that test. You can buy this, I believe you can buy one on Amazon, and you can do a finger stick. It's very easy to get. Then there's test for leaky gut to see if you have that, test for dysbiosis. And we spoke a little bit about food allergy and food sensitivity. If you have started on one of these, let's say you've started on the autoimmune protocol, and you are not really getting anywhere, and you're frustrated with that, then it's reasonable to get a food sensitivity and see if there is something that could potentially be affecting that. Now, keep in mind, look, we've spoken about all the different types of causes, from genetic to environmental, and it's possible that in an individual case, perhaps food is not a huge thing, and someone, I've certainly seen patients who are on a very healthy diet who still have autoimmune disease, but I've also usually if someone is motivated and they do change all the things that a lot of the things that we're talking about, generally you get to see some sort of improvement. But these are additional tests that could potentially be done. And as I said, most of these are not covered by insurance, unfortunately. So that's a downside. And quite frankly, a lot of conventional doctors are not even familiar with these tests. So you have to reach out to someone who has an interest in lifestyle medicine or functional medicine or integrative medicine, any of those terms, and you can get that test. I mean, if you are interested, let's say, I could certainly, and you live in Florida, New York, or California, I'd be happy to order those tests for you if you find that you would like more information on that. Contact me. Next is medically supervised fasting. So there have been some studies. We've spoken a lot about the fasting mimicking diet, where you have a reduced calorie diet for 5 days. And there have been some studies, I believe, with MS for that, but there's really not enough data out there yet to say that that is beneficial for autoimmune disease. I'm waiting for more information on that. However, medically supervised water fasting, somewhere between 3 and 7 days, or even up to 20 or 30 days, can be done at True North Health Center. And they're actually popping up, medically supervised fasting centers are popping up in many places around the country. But True North has sort of been a leader. They're I want to say they're in California, Northern California, or in the Pacific Northwest. Can't remember. But I've heard lectures in person by the medical director there, and saw some amazing case reports that it's incredible. Of course, as I've mentioned, medically supervised water fasting has been shown to help autoimmune disease for, like I said, probably 100 years. So this is a great option if you can go for a week or more. And it sounds crazy, I guess, to most people when you tell them, you're going to fast for 21 days. But even people who are not overweight have plenty of residual, have enough of fat really to be able to do that without any issue. And after a few days, most people are not hungry. And of course, this is all, you would never, ever do this on your own. They do lab tests and such. So medically supervised fasting can be an incredible benefit to autoimmune disease, and something I think that if you have an autoimmune disease, or someone you love has an autoimmune disease, it's certainly something to just go to their website and take a look at it. Recommendations, I would say, I would definitely read one of Dr. Furman's books for the Nutritarian Diet. His website's a good resource, and he has a mini ebook on autoimmune disease on his website that you could read. Autoimmune protocol all over the internet. Anti-Inflammatory Diet, go to Dr. Weil's website. There's a great deal of information there as well. And we're moving to the last part of this, and I just wanted to show you, because it's somewhat of interest to me, that a lot of us have heard of these medications. These are basically the biologic medicines. You see a lot of them, Humira, you see commercials. Humira is like one of the top medicines in the entire country or entire world, I think, actually. It's a multi-billion-dollar medication. And I've certainly used and continue to use certainly Humira and Cosentyx and Taltz and Stelara. I use all of these, Rituxan. But I just wanted to show you that they're basically broken down into 4 categories. One's called the TNF blocker, specifically TNF alpha, and then interleukin inhibitors, which are IL-17 or IL-23, and then B cell inhibitors. And okay, so why am I talking about this? Because TNF alpha can be reduced by natural means. And I just want to go through these. So vagus nerve stimulation, which is a nerve that pretty much runs, pretty much all the way, it innervates your gut and comes all the way up your neck into your brain. It's the longest nerve in your body. And by stimulating this, it sort of has an effect on the balancing of the nervous system. And now they've done electrical stimulation for this for psoriasis. There was actually a very interesting study where they implanted a electrical stimulation device to stimulate the vagus nerve, and there was improvement in psoriasis. But there are other things that can do this, which is cold exposure, deep and slow breathing. We spoke a little bit about that last week. Singing, gargling, humming, probiotics. Be careful with those. Meditation, omega-3 can help. Exercise, massage, laughing. Curcumin also lowers TNF alpha, and so does the Mediterranean diet. So while these drug targets are not completely specific for the disease that we're talking about, because if we were 100% specific for finding the exact target that is the reason for these conditions, then these medicines would probably be like 100%. They'd put people into 100% remission. These are just parts of the immune system that are blocked with these medicines. And there are other ways, not that you wouldn't go on these medicines. I'm not saying you are going to swap these two, just that it's interesting to me that there are natural known ways of reducing that. And we spoke about that a little bit up here when we talked about these, because as you can see here, TNF alpha, curcumin, bilberry also does it. Green tea lowers it. Narraginin, apple. So lots of different things can lower TNF alpha. The next is the interleukin inhibitors. And I spoke about that in terms of one of them, which is called interleukin 17, is made worse by salt. So much so that a fairly well-known, or at least I should say, dependable person is officially recommending that salt be reduced as best as possible with people with psoriasis, because this particular IL-17, the medicines that affect that are actually pretty effective for reducing psoriasis. So in general, you probably should watch your salt intake. Cruciferous vegetables, which also have this effect. And of course, with say the Nutritarian diet that we spoke about, it's an enormous amount of cruciferous vegetables. There's an emphasis on cruciferous vegetables because of the immune effects that it actually has. Zinc, most people are deficient in zinc. So quite frankly, I think everyone should take somewhere between 15 and 25 milligrams a day of zinc. And next week, we'll actually be speaking about vitamin supplementation, how to decide what makes sense with taking supplements. Curcumin, vitamin D, which we've spoken about before. These medicines like Rituxan, well, olive leaf extract, but not many studies on that. And there's not a whole lot actually for Orencia, which all of you are probably seeing commercials for, in terms of natural ways of doing what this medication does. So that gives you a brief overview of autoimmune disease, a very, very superficial, cursory look actually at this particular constellation of diseases. For those of you who have specific questions, as always, you can reach out to me personally. And if I don't know the answer, in terms of the specific autoimmune disease that you might be dealing with, I certainly know who to refer you to or contact in terms of lifestyle management of of these conditions. So thank you for your attention. If anyone has any questions, please do type them into the box. And as I said, next week, I think is an important important episode, because people often are, when someone comes in with when I look at the vitamins that someone's on, I always ask them, well, why are you on this? Or why are you on that? You need to be able to know why you're taking a specific supplement, because if you don't know, it could be harming you. Now, in general, people are not overly damaged by supplements. However, thankfully, we will speak about certain ones that can be damaging and should have been probably, and still being put into supplements all the time. We'll also talk about the difference between antioxidants and minerals, because with minerals, you can take too many very, very easily. So things like zinc that we spoke about, we'll talk about others. And then when it comes to antioxidants, what the situation is with that. We'll also talk about why there is a sort of war against supplements, and why the people who are looking at that are sort of looking at it from a very different perspective than those who are looking at it from sort of looking at each individual and how a supplement could help. So I think it's a very important talk, and I hope to see all of you on that. Sharon's asking, is Dr. Whale's podcast called Body of Wonder? Yes, it's called Body of Wonder, and I really do enjoy it. It's a fabulous podcast, so I highly recommend it. And they're short and not too complicated. Very, very, very good podcast. So next week, I do think it's an important one, and I think it's also very interesting because people are taking lots of supplements. So Pat's asking if I'm drinking Gynostema tea, and I am not drinking it tonight, but I usually do drink Gynostema tea during Wednesday Night Live. But for some reason tonight, I'm just drinking water. But I do drink it almost every week. And if you don't know the reasons for that, then it's come up probably 6, 7, 8 times maybe during our classes. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and staying on for the entire talk. As I'm always just thrilled that everyone who comes on stays on, which means that hopefully you're engaged and you're finding some value in what I'm talking about. And see you next week on the talk about supplements and vitamins. Everyone have a great week, and thank you again for your attention. Stay well.